Hey friends, welcome back. So today I'm going to be giving you an update on the IQON ACT skates. I've put over 120 miles on them in probably the last 6 weeks, and so I want to kind of give you an update on how that's going. Alright, so this is the stock liner, and I rode these in the skates for about 60 miles before switching it up. So, a couple things I want to comment on is, when you put your foot in there, the liner feels, generally pretty stiff, pretty supportive, but as it heats up, then the materials actually get really soft and kind of spongy, which is great if you're skating aggressive because that gives you more flexibility and more play in your skate. But with this skate, what I felt it did is it compromised the responsiveness. So basically, like when I lace this up, this liner fits the shell really well when you put your foot in there, but as it heats up, I found that I had to tighten the liner, around my foot to kind of hold it in place. But then that gives the liner some play between the shell, and then you just end up with some sloppiness that results in a reduced power transfer. So one thing I want to mention too is with the mounting hardware, I found that this mounting hardware is really solid. I haven't had any issues with it loosening up, that's with the frame bolts or, the hardware mounting to the boot itself. Everything's been really solid, hasn't moved. So, that alleviated some of my original concerns that I had. Alright, so here's a comparison of the prime liner, which is the stock prime liner, with the aftermarket crown liner. And you can see that the crown liner has more padding kind of throughout the liner, which in my opinion helps fill out the shell in the ACT. And as I mentioned with the prime, once I tightened the liner up, I felt like it pulled the liner away from the inside of the shell in certain areas. And then, when the liner warms up, it just results in some sloppiness and reduced power transfer. So with going with a thicker liner, it basically helps fill up the volume, offers, a little more stiffness, and which results in, less power loss. So if you've got a foot that is, flat, skinny ankles, low volume, I think going with something that has more volume just to fill up the space is, really going to help you make the best out of this skate. Alright, so one thing I want to talk about is some of the flex on this skate. So you can see in the toes, I can't even push or squeeze it down. But once you move up to the midsection, it actually does a pretty decent job of flexing. So that means when you're lacing it up, the plastic will give some, but also, side to side movement, isn't too bad. Alright, so I kind of wanted to talk about the bottom of the skate a little bit. So, one of my concerns originally was because you have this basically honeycomb pattern, that it was going to be really bad for collecting dirt, and there's really no way to clean it out. So, 120 miles, and you can see that there is some dirt accumulation in there, but, it's not, doesn't have any functional impact. right, so this is the Underssoul, and you can see that within the last 6 weeks, it has packed in, and you can see the markings from my liner on it, and it's made from a different material and hardness than the shock absorber. And then, you know, one thing that I've noticed too while skating it is before I swap liners, you could really feel yourself digging into the basically the insole and some squishiness there, which led to some I would say reduced power transfer. Let's talk about the forward flex a little bit. So, you know, I've put 120 miles on these, which I don't know what that equates to in hours, but I've noticed that these fins have really not softened up at all. And, you know, whenever I'm leaning forward, you know, what I find is that, you know, the cuff is basically twisting, you know, so what you get is, you know, kind of this twisting motion where one part of the cuff goes up, one part of it goes down to basically compensate for these fins not moving, which is working. Hasn't really seemed to impact my ride. Kind of a strange feature because you can physically feel the front of the cuff basically giving away versus the fins in the back flexing. But, you know, the way that I skate big wheel, I don't need a ton of forward flex to do what I do. But that could be, you know, an issue if you're skating, like, say, wizard or aggressive. All right, so one thing I want to talk about is just how big this cuff is. And, you know, with this cuff, like, I think that's part of the problem that I had with the stock liner is you really have to, like, ratchet this cuff down to be able to get it to fit your liner. And once you do that, it's fine. But part of the problem is that, you know, whenever you ratchet in a cuff and then you have flex in the shell of the skate, it'll pull in the cuff bolts. And then if you've got really bony ankles, then you can kind of feel that pushing in on the side. So, you know, having an oversized cuff can definitely lead to, you know, some comfort issues when riding if you don't have the right kind of liner in there. Alright, so I want to talk about the Revolve system real quick. So I tried out a bunch of different positions, and I felt the way that it came stock with the bolt in the downward 6 o'clock position was honestly the best for stiffness with the skate. Because I've been trying to get the liner and the shell dialed in, I haven't tried any of the wheels on the skate. So I'm still rolling the 90mm endless wheels with the 90-110 endless frames. But that's going to be next on my list, is trying 110 wheels and seeing how does that feel with the setup. Alright, so let's talk about what I think about the skate so far. So first thought is that I think, you know, it is a fairly wide, high volume shell. And I think the stock liner that comes with it is meant for someone with a high volume foot in order to fill the room in the shell. If you've got a narrower, flatter, skinny ankles, what you're going to want to do is change out the liners. I've only tried the crown liners in these. I haven't tried anything else. That's something else I want to try and do. You know, so that's kind of the first thought. You know, if you have a low volume foot, you're using the stock liner, I think you're gonna end up with a lot of slop and loss of responsiveness in the skate if you're using them for big wheel, which is what I encountered. So, you know, I think changing the liner drastically improved my experience with these. I think the shell, I don't know that it's overly hard, and I don't know that it's definitely not super flexy. I think it's kind of a medium flex skate. I don't think that it is as supportive as, like, you know, your standard black FR1 skate. You know, some of the colored ones are softer plastic, so they do have more flex, is what I found. You know, so take that for what it's worth. As far as wheels on this, you know, I've been skating these 90mm wheels. That's, you know, been really good. I am worried about putting a bigger wheel on it still, just because, you know, trying to resolve the power transfer issue has been a little bit of work, and whenever you put more or bigger wheels on it, you're going to end up with what's the best way to say it? You're going to end up being able to torque the skate a lot easier. And my experience has been, when you put a bigger wheel on a skate, that's where you truly see how much flex there is. So if I'm already dealing with power loss at 90 mil, then, you know, I can only imagine that 110 is going to exacerbate that. You know, super comfortable though. Like, if you're a person who is looking for a skate and you need more room in the shell, and you don't care about, you know, power transfer, and you're just looking for, you know, just easy strolling, then this is going to be an extremely good skate for you. You know, you are going to have to play around with it, get it dialed in, but, you know, overall, like, I'm having a good time on these. I don't know that I like them any better than the FR1s. I certainly don't like them worse. I would just say it is not a performance skate for at least big wheel. Keep in mind, I haven't skated them aggressive or wizard, so I can't comment on that. But hopefully I'm giving enough information so you can kind of interpolate the data. But yeah, I think that kind of covers my initial thoughts on it. You know, definitely some quirkiness with the cuff size, and yeah, the shock absorber, you know, really good shock absorber, but kind of interesting, you know, with that undersole and how it's like a pretty decently soft foam. I would think that they'd make it all out of the same material, so that way, you know, you don't get any squishiness with it. But I mean, that's kind of a minor nitpick. Yeah, I think that about covers it for my first 120 miles on these. You know, oh, I should mention that, you know, I can ride these comfortably, you know, for easy, like 10 miles, no issues. I have noticed that on hotter days, you know, again, with the MyFit liners, even with the crown, they get, you know, somewhat soft, and then, you know, I've got to kind of like tighten everything back up like mid-skate, but it's not that big of a deal. You know, it's compromise is comfort, right? Like, if it's comfortable, it's fun, you know, I think that's what really matters. So yeah, it's kind of my first thoughts. So I just wrapped up 9 miles, and I wanted to show kind of how malleable these liners are once they heat up. So you can see they get super soft and squishy. All right, well, that wraps up today's video. Thank you all for checking in, and we'll catch you next time.